The silence in the room was a physical thing. You could taste it, a blend of expensive champagne vapor, shattered expectations, and the acrid bite of humiliation. 200 guests, dressed in their finest pastel attire, stood frozen like mannequins in a high-end boutique window. Every iPhone was raised, not in celebration, but in the instinctive, voyeuristic reflex of the modern age. They weren't capturing a memory, they were capturing a detonation. On the polished marble floor, thrashing in a puddle of vintage Dom Pérignon and shards of crystal, was my brother, Mark, the golden bastard. His custom-tailored linen shirt was soaked through, clinging to his heaving chest as he wept, actually wept, like a child who had been told the amusement park was closed. A few feet away, my wife, Emma, stood screaming. Her silhouette was a portrait of ruin. The custom Vera Wang maternity dress, which I had paid $34,000 for, was splattered with the biohazard of her own fury. Mascara carved dark trenches down her cheeks, her mouth a cavern of rage, as she pointed a trembling finger at me, shrieking obscenities that drowned in the cacophony of the crowd. And my parents? They were retreating, literally backing away toward the floral arrangements, as if the 10-foot-tall ice sculpture of a stork could shield them from the radioactive fallout of their own complicity. They weren't looking at the screen. They couldn't. They were looking at me, trying to gauge if the financial ark they had spent years boarding was about to be scuttled. I stood perfectly still on the elevated stage, the wireless microphone cool and solid in my hand. I adjusted the cufflink on my left wrist, platinum, matte finish, a custom piece that cost more than Mark's entire existence. I didn't raise my voice. I wouldn't offer them the sedative of my anger. I simply took a sip of the Macallan M that I'd poured for myself before the chaos erupted, feeling the liquid pass over my palate, a grounding mechanism. I let my gaze sweep across the wreckage, a surgeon surveying a successful incision. Then I allowed myself a small, precise smile, the kind a wolf offers the moon. I leaned into the microphone, my voice a low, controlled rumble that cut through the static of panic. You're probably wondering how we got here. 8 months earlier, the architecture of my destruction had already been drafted, though the blueprints were hidden under the saccharine veneer of domestic joy. Emma came to me on a Tuesday evening, her eyes carefully wide, holding a white plastic stick like it was a golden ticket. She announced her pregnancy with the theatricality of a woman who had just secured a Lifetime Achievement Award. I remember the way the sunset light caught her hair, turning it into spun gold. I remember the false sincerity in her trembling lip. I catalogued it all, even then. My initial reaction is what you would expect from a man who values legacy. I was thrilled, my name, my blood, my work extending into the future. I didn't grow up with wealth. I forged it in the crucible of late nights, algorithmic trading, and a relentless refusal to accept mediocrity. To give my child the safety I never had, that was the entire point of the empire I had built. In those first few weeks, I became a caricature of the supportive husband. I tolerated everything. I tolerated the urgent Amex Centurion alerts that hit my phone like machine gun fire, a $200,000 renovation for a nursery designed for a royal, equipped with air purification systems that could rival a NASA clean room. I tolerated the constant, grating presence of my younger brother, Mark. Mark was a study in human decay. At 27, he possessed the unearned arrogance of a man who had never met a consequence he couldn't blame on a bad market. He was allergic to labor, yet deeply addicted to the aesthetics of luxury. He'd saunter into my home, into the kitchen I paid for, the Scotch cabinet I curated, and pour himself a glass of Bruichladdich black art as if he understood the nuance of its distillation. He understood nothing except that my success was his birthright. My parents, of course, facilitated this. To them, Mark was the charismatic, sensitive artist who just needed a little support, while I was the cold, clinical machine who happened to print the money. I began to notice the subtleties. The human body is a liar, but it's a bad one. You just have to know how to read the micro-expressions. When I'd walk into a room, the laughter between Emma and Mark wouldn't stop. It would change shape. It would harden at the edges, morphing from a belly laugh to a polite conspiratorial chuckle. There were the inside jokes, the way Mark knew exactly how Emma took her turmeric latte, a preference I hadn't been informed of. The way his hand would hover near the small of her back, never quite landing when I was looking directly at them, but often caught in the reflection of the window glass I pretended to stare out of. The gaslighting was the most artful component of their scheme. I'd come home early from a meeting, finding Mark's car in the driveway again, and Emma would attack. "He's just helping me assemble the crib, and you're profiling him like a criminal. It's pathetic. You're literally abusive with your paranoia." My mother would call an hour later, her voice dripping with condescension. "Sweetie, your brother is so excited to be an uncle. You need to stop projecting your trust issues. He's family. He's safe." It was in that precise moment, watching the surreal spectacle of my mother defending my wife's affair without noticing the irony, that the switch flipped. The pain was a physical weight in my chest for exactly 3 seconds. Then it evaporated. The emotional detritus was swept away by a cold, clarifying wind. I wasn't a husband anymore. I wasn't a son. I wasn't a brother. I was a transaction analyst. They had breached the contract. The audit had begun.
The Sigma response isn't an explosion. It's a radiation leak. Silent, invisible, and terminally lethal over time. I stepped into stealth mode. The next morning, I kissed Emma on the forehead. She flinched, surprised by the warmth, and told her I'd been under too much stress, that she was right. I saw the flicker of triumph in her eyes, the stupid, blinding vanity of a mediocre mind. The first step was the architecture of surveillance. The house we lived in was a smart home I had designed the infrastructure for. It was trivial to install secondary audio recording devices, not the cheap, illegal spy store gadgets, but bespoke, legally vetted systems designed for home security and dispute resolution in a two-party consent state, a loophole meticulously planned by my legal team. I wired the common areas, the living room, the kitchen, and, crucially, the guest house where Mark crashed when he was too drunk to drive. The harvest was immediate and devastating. I'd listen to the recordings, not at home, but in my sparse utilitarian satellite office downtown. I'd sit in the dark, the city lights blinking below, and I'd let their voices fill the room. It wasn't masochism, it was reconnaissance. Audio transcript, day 4. Emma, laughing. "He asked me if I needed to tell him anything. He looked like a lost puppy. I almost puked on his handmade carbonara." Mark, mouth full, presumably of my imported manchego. "Just keep stroking his ego, babe. 9 months to go, then we get the payout. Mom says he's already setting up a trust fund under the illusion it's his." Emma, God, imagine being that pathetic. All that money and zero instinct. I deserve a medal for faking it this long. The confirmation of my parents' knowledge hit differently. It was the final severing of a biological tether I didn't realize still existed.
They weren't just enabling Mark's bad behavior to keep the peace. They were active strategists in the theft of my legacy. They had decided that the wrong son had the money, and they needed to redistribute it to the loved son by any means necessary, including paternity fraud. But audio, as visceral as it was merely spice. The entree required DNA. I needed an irrefutable, court-admissible mathematical nuke. The opportunity presented itself through Emma's obsession with her appearance. She feared pregnancy bloating, so she had signed up for a boutique vitality clinic that administered designer IV drips and vitamin cocktails. It was run by a man more afraid of a tax audit than a Hippocratic oath violation. I paid off the clinic's administrator a quick transfer of cryptocurrency to a blind account to add a non-invasive non-pregnancy paternity test to Emma's blood panel during her next hydration therapy session. The blood draw was routine. She Instagrammed the needle in her arm, captioning it "Mommy Self-Care." Mark's sample was even easier. During a tedious Sunday dinner, I watched him guzzle a limited-edition craft ale I had imported from Belgium. He didn't taste it, he inhaled it. When he went to the restroom to vomit, he couldn't hold his liquor, a failure of constitution. I didn't move with haste, I moved with certainty. I retrieved the half-drunk glass with a sterile surgical glove palmed from my pocket. I swabbed the rim, sealed the sample in a vacuum-locked evidence bag, and had the glass washed, dried, and back on the coaster before he finished retching. The 2 weeks waiting for the results were an exercise in stoic endurance. I had the data routed to a private encrypted server, bypassing the clinic entirely. During those 14 days, I played the part of the oblivious fool with the precision of a method actor. I rubbed Emma's feet. I listened to Mark's business ideas, a catastrophic fusion of cryptocurrency and NFTs for gourmet dog food. I even nodded sympathetically when my father lectured me on the importance of family loyalty. When the notification finally pinged on my secure device, I didn't open it immediately. I finished my espresso. I looked out over the skyline. I savored the last moment where the outcome was a Schrodinger's cat. Then I opened it. Probability of paternity, 99.9998%. Biological father, Mark. The confirmation wasn't a shock. It was a release. A deep, somatic exhale. I allowed myself a single bitter laugh in the silence of the office. They weren't just adulterers, they were slappy. They had underestimated the quiet man. I pulled up the design software for the gender reveal party, an event I had insisted on planning for my beautiful wife, and I began to dismantle their reality, pixel by pixel.
The venue was the St. Regis Penthouse Ballroom. $50,000 buys a fleeting illusion, a crystalline backdrop against which the vulgarity of their scheme would seem even more grotesque. I had insisted on a guest list of 200. "Mark, invite everyone. Dad, invite the business partners. This is the heir," I had declared, slapping Mark on the back so hard he choked on his champagne. The future that didn't exist was the bait. Emma was radiant that afternoon, radiating the smug glow of a woman who thought she had gained the system. She kissed me on the lips before we walked in. "I love you, provider," she whispered, a phrase I now recognized as the title of my servitude, not a term of endearment. Mark was basking in the reflected glory, preening like a cockerel, high-fiving the waitstaff. The party built its momentum. The gin flowed. The gossip hummed. Finally, the moment arrived. Emma took the stage, the microphone trembling slightly in her perfectly manicured grip. She told a scripted saccharine story of our love, painting me as the boring, steady glacier that provided the fertile soil for her and Mark's joyful spirit. The crowd awed. My mother wiped away a theatrical tear.
I stood in the corner, a glass of Macallan M untouched in my hand, my expression a mask of placid, adoring husband. "And now," Emma announced, "my amazing provider, the man who makes this all possible, is going to share the big moment." She handed me the microphone. Our fingers touched. She felt the cold of my platinum ring, and for a split second the smile on her face faltered. She scanned my eyes and saw nothing. No love, no anger, just the flat, infinite gaze of a glacier. I didn't take the remote for the confetti cannons. I pulled out my own device, a sleek graphite clicker that looked like a presentation remote. I stepped into the center of the stage, the spotlight isolating me. "Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mum and Dad. You've all taught me that truth isn't a moral concept, it's just a matter of evidence." I clicked the remote. The giant LED screen behind me, which was supposed to show a loop of baby socks and lilac mist, flickered and went black. Then the first transcript appeared. The audio-visual team, paid generously by me, had synced the text with the actual waveforms of their voices. He looked like a lost puppy. I almost puked on his handmade carbonara. The room went silent. A collective gasp rolled through the crowd, but not as loud as the sound of Emma's breath catching in her throat. She turned to me, her face draining of color. I didn't look at her. I clicked the remote again. A second slide. "Mum says he's already setting up a trust fund under the illusion it's his." "No," Emma whispered, stumbling backward, her hand reaching out as if she could claw the words off the screen. Mark was frozen in the aisle, his face a sickly white, the champagne flute slipping from his grasp to shatter on the floor. But I wasn't done. "But Matthew 7:16 asks, 'Ye shall know them by their fruits,'" I quoted, my voice carrying a liturgical weight. "So let's look at the fruit." The final click. The screen displayed the document, the official letterhead, the bold, unmissable, damning numbers. Paternity test result, 99.9998% match for Mark. The chaos was instantaneous. It was a beautiful, chaotic symphony of horror. 200 phones surged upward, capturing not the celebration of a golden bastard, but the execution of a lie. Emma didn't throw a glass at me out of anger. She threw it out of sheer primal panic. It missed, shattering against the screen displaying her fraud. She began to scream, a raw, guttural sound that had no words, just a frequency of pure loss. Mark collapsed, literally collapsed onto his knees, tearing at his hair, sobbing. My parents weren't retreating anymore. They were rushing towards me, their faces twisted in fury, my father's mouth forming curses about family and ruining your brother. I raised my hand. The room fell silent again, expectant. "Emma," I said, my tone utterly conversational, "there is an Uber Black waiting for you downstairs. The driver has your mother's address pre-programmed. You have 1 hour to vacate my property. Marshal Patterson," I gestured to a rigid man in a suit standing at the back of the room, "is my estate executor. He will escort you to the house to collect your toiletries and ensure you touch nothing of value. The divorce papers, citing fraud, are already in your inbox." I turned to my parents, who were now clinging to each other. "Mum, Dad, the joint credit cards I gave you for emergencies have been terminated as of 90 seconds ago. I pointed to Mark, who was still weeping on the floor. "His rental car has been marked as stolen. I suggest you pay for his Uber, too." I locked eyes with Mark. "Oh, and the venue. The $50,000 deposit. I cancelled the payment this morning, so you might want to stand up, Mark. You're on the hook for the cleanup."
In the aftermath, they told me I was cruel. They told a real man doesn't air his dirty laundry. They told me I had a responsibility to protect the family's reputation. I found these statements to be fascinating artifacts of a dying mindset. I didn't air dirty laundry. I simply turned on the lights in a room filled with monsters,
and the monster screamed because the light burned. Emma's legal offensive was laughable. She hired a shark attorney on contingency, promising a cut of a payday that would never come. They sued for alimony for the apartment, for emotional distress, claiming the public reveal had endangered her and the unborn child. My legal team, a force of nature I keep on a massive annual retainer specifically for weather events like this, responded with a countersuit for paternity fraud, intentional infliction of financial deceit, and recovery of all marital resources spent on a pregnancy derived from a documented conspiracy. The prenup was titanium, but the paternity fraud was a uranium isotope. It left her radioactive in the family courts. Her attorney dropped the case 3 weeks later, citing irreconcilable conflicts of interest. Emma was left alone, financially blacklisted, carrying the child of a broke man who still lived in my parents' basement. Mark's fate was even more pathetic. He is a man defined by the void of his own capability. Without my financial ecosystem to parasite off of, he crumbled. The venue, faced with a destroyed ice sculpture and champagne-soaked linens, sued him for the full amount plus damages. My parents remortgaged their house, a house I had bought them, to pay the debt collectors, a transaction I was happy to approve of from a distance, selling the note to a particularly aggressive private equity firm I knew. The last I heard, Mark was trying to sell that gourmet dog food crypto idea on LinkedIn. The silence of his notifications is the only legacy he will ever leave. My parents attempted the most predictable maneuver of all, the reconciliation play. Letters, emails, voicemails, a digital trail of tears. We are your blood. We made a mistake. Think of your mother's heart. I read them with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist studying a lost tribe. Their love had always been a conditional currency, and I was simply no longer accepting their tender. I blocked their numbers. I diverted their emails to a folder that auto-deletes every 30 days. They are alive only in the periphery of my memory, a ghost story I've stopped telling. People often ask me if I feel lonely. It's a question that stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of the Sigma archetype. Humans, by their nature, create drama. They create chaos. They create debt, both emotional and financial. I don't need a crowd. I need a clean operating system. Standing in my penthouse now, the silence is not a sign of emptiness, it is a sign of optimization. The air is filtered, the light is calibrated, the betrayal, the screaming, the champagne-stained marble, it's all a memory of a different man's life. They thought they were playing a game of Fool the Wallet. They didn't realize they were playing a game of three-dimensional chess against an opponent who had already forfeited them the illusion of victory. They chased feelings. I processed data. They screamed for justice. I delivered exactitude. In the end, they received not just punishment, but the most terrifying gift a man can give his enemies, absolute, irreversible irrelevance. And as I pour myself another glass of whiskey, looking out over the circuitry of the city lights, I realize that revenge isn't a hot, burning passion. It's a cold dish, yes, but more importantly, it's a dish you must cook yourself, methodically, precisely, and without ever letting the meat know it's in the pan.